LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the December 19th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing. And today, actually, I'm doing something a little different than my regular picking out the clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, because I also want to cover the breaking news from today, Monday, that the January 6th committee has sent 4 criminal referrals to the Department of Justice recommending charges against former President Donald Trump. That's never happened before in history, so I will eventually get to the Sunday news programs covering the so-called border crisis, the growing COVID pandemic, and more than that, but first, I'm going to use my background as a criminal defense attorney to commit some legal analysis and criticize the Fox News legal analysis of the January 6th committee's criminal referral. And I like to start with some political comedy. And this political comedy, well, you can tell me if you think it's comedy. It's on the topic of January 6th, and it kind of reminds me of how if you're like in a bad relationship or a bad friendship or whatever, like you'll have somebody who you are supposedly close to, but they are always like criticizing you or insulting you, and then you like call them on it, and oh, I'm just breaking your balls. That's guys say that. I'm just breaking your balls. It's just a joke. I'm just joking. Well, this is like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene claiming she's like just joking about January 6th. Which is kind of hard to believe, but that's like the excuse for like someone who's abusive and, this is like the ultra MAGA Republican cruelty is the point type stuff, and, election deniers and January 6th deniers, and this is some real January 6th denialism that I'll talk about a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
If Bannon and I had organized that, we would have won. Not to mention, it would have been armed.
So yeah, I'll show you that clip again when I get to the Meet the Press newsmaker clip where Chuck Todd from NBC News' Meet the Press asks Republican Asa Hutchinson, who may run as like a never Trumper or like a Trump denier, not an election denier, and like how he would deal with Marjorie Taylor Greene making fun of the January 6th insurrection. Like, oh, if Steve Bannon and I had organized it, it would have been successful and we would have been armed. Well, actually, people were armed. And even some people had guns, but they were armed with like flagpoles. Like they were armed with Blue Lives Matter flags and American flags. They attacked law enforcement with Blue Lives Matter and American flags. That's like one of the weird ironies of this whole thing. But anyway, I don't know. Was that a joke? Was she being sarcastic? Was she joking? Or just like after the fact, she's just doing like, oh, I wasn't being serious, even though she was being serious. But you can let me know what you think in the comments section. And the next thing I want to show you is the really historical event that happened at the January 6th committee final meeting today. You'll see that this is a clip of Representative Jamie Raskin outlining the 4 criminal charges that the January 6th committee decided to refer to the Department of Justice, saying that Donald Trump, you'll see Attorney John Eastman and some others also committed these crimes because some of them are conspiracies, and you'll see Jamie Raskin say multiple times that he doesn't know everyone who was involved in the conspiracy because they had limited investigative tools. But anyway, here are the 4 main charges, and I'll talk about those charges, and then I'm going to show you the Fox News legal analysis right after the close of the hearing that was totally bogus. Fox News legal analysts Jonathan Turley and Andrew McCarthy, who are like total hacks, totally giving you a biased, I'm going to give you much more accurate legal analysis than they will. But first, here's Jamie Raskin in like the key 5 minutes of the hearing, laying out the 4 criminal referrals that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch them together over here.
The first criminal statute we invoke for referral, therefore, is Title 18, Section 1512C, which makes it unlawful for anyone to corruptly obstruct, influence, or impede any official proceeding of the United States government. We believe that the evidence described by my colleagues today and assembled throughout our hearings warrants a criminal referral of former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violations of this statute. The whole purpose and obvious effect of Trump's scheme were to obstruct, influence, and impede this official proceeding, the central moment for the lawful transfer of power in the United States. Second, we believe that there is more than sufficient evidence to refer former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violating Title 18, Section 371. This statute makes it a crime to conspire to defraud the United States. In other words, to make an agreement to impair, obstruct, or defeat the lawful functions of the United States government by deceitful or dishonest means. Former President Trump did not engage in a plan to defraud the United States acting alone. He entered into agreements, formal and informal, with several other individuals who assisted him with his criminal objectives. Our report describes in detail the actions of numerous co-conspirators who agreed with and participated in Trump's plan to impair, obstruct, and defeat the certification of President Biden's electoral victory. That said, the subcommittee does not attempt to determine all of the potential participants in this conspiracy, as our understanding of the role of many individuals may be incomplete even today because they refuse to answer our questions. We trust that the Department of Justice will be able to form a far more complete picture through its own investigation. Third, we make a referral based on Title 18, Section 1001, which makes it unlawful to knowingly and willfully make materially false statements to the federal government. The evidence clearly suggests that President Trump conspired with others to submit slates of fake electors to Congress and the National Archives. We believe that this evidence we set forth in our report is more than sufficient for a criminal referral of former President Donald J. Trump and others in connection with this offense. As before, we don't try to determine all of the participants in this conspiracy, many of whom refuse to answer our questions while under oath. We trust that the Department of Justice will be able to form a more complete picture through its own investigation. The fourth and final statute we invoke for referral is Title 18, Section 2383. The statute applies to anyone who incites, assists, or engages in insurrection against the United States of America, and anyone who gives aid or comfort to an insurrection. An insurrection is a rebellion against the authority of the United States. It is a grave federal offense anchored in the Constitution itself, which repeatedly opposes insurrections and domestic violence, and indeed uses participation in insurrection by office holders as automatic grounds for disqualification from ever holding public office again at the federal or state level. Anyone who incites others to engage in rebelling, assists them in doing so, or gives aid and comfort to those engaged in insurrection is guilty of a federal crime. The committee believes that more than sufficient evidence exists for a criminal referral of former President Trump for assisting or aiding and comforting those at the Capitol who engaged in a violent attack on the United States. The committee has developed significant evidence that President Trump intended to disrupt the peaceful transition of power under our Constitution. The President has an affirmative and primary constitutional duty to act to take care that the laws be faithfully executed Nothing could be a greater betrayal of this duty than to assist in insurrection against the constitutional order. The complete factual basis for this referral is set forth in detail throughout our report. These are not the only statutes that are potentially relevant to President Trump's conduct related to the 2020 election. Depending on evidence developed by the Department of Justice, the president's actions could certainly trigger other criminal violations.
So yeah, that is the key 5 minutes there where Representative Jamie Raskin laid out the 4 criminal referrals. He said that there might be more crimes. Notice they didn't charge Trump with seditious conspiracy. Later I heard him say on a show that because they weren't sure that they could connect him to the violence part, because seditious conspiracy has to include an agreement to engage in violence, and they didn't have the facts for that. But all the other 4 seem to make sense, and I'm going to go through them really briefly before I criticize the Fox News legal commentators, Jonathan Turley and Andrew McCarthy, for being total hacks and not even really dealing with the substance. So yeah, like the first charge is obstruction of a official proceeding under 18 U.S.C. section 1512 sub C, and I've been talking about this like all the way back since the first January 6th committee hearing, or even before. This is the relevant part of the statute. And by the way, down in the video description under sources, I put you can read the entire text of the statute. I'm going to show you most of the text of the statutes for 18 U.S.C. 1512. I'm just showing subsection C, and it's actually C2 that's most important. Whoever corruptly otherwise obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding or attempts to do so shall be fined under this title or in prison not more than 20 years. So it's a 20-year felony for corruptly obstructing an official proceeding, and there's already been a bunch of case law showing that the January 6th congressional proceeding where they're supposed to certify the vote, that is an official proceeding that qualifies under 18 U.S.C. 1512 sub C. So there's really strong evidence both on sending the mob to the Capitol to try to stop the certification of the vote, and also the pressure on Mike Pence to not certify the vote. Those both are strong fact patterns that support that first criminal referral. The second criminal referral is conspiracy to defraud the United States. They say, people who conspire to commit any offense against the United States or defraud the United States. Here's like the longer part of 18 U.S.C. section 371. If 2 or more persons conspire to commit any offense against the United States or defraud the United States or any agency thereof in any matter or for any purpose. So this includes the fake electors, where they tried to, and also the whole conspiracy to subvert the peaceful transfer of power on January 6th, with trying to stop the certification of the votes on January 6th. Both of those support the conspiracy to defraud the United States. The third referral is conspiracy to make a false statement. That also refers back to the Section 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States, but it's also the famous 18 U.S.C. 1001. That's the statute that makes it a crime to lie to Congress. I talked about that weeks ago. You don't have to be sworn in or take any oath. If you lie in a congressional hearing, you have violated 18 U.S.C. 1001. It's like if you except as otherwise provided, whoever in any matter within the jurisdiction of the executive, legislative, or judicial branch of the government knowingly and willfully falsifies, conceals, covers up by trick, scheme, or device a material fact, makes any material, false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement or representation, or makes or uses false writing or document, knowing the same to contain any materially false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement or entry. So, the fake elector scheme definitely falls into that category. And then the final The fourth ground is this incite, assist, or aid or comfort in insurrection. Anyone who incites, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection or gives aid or comfort thereto, 18 U.S.C. 2383. And I actually think they left out some, like, an important phrase. If you look at the full statute here, I look at that second phrase. It's whoever incites sets on foot. Sets on foot. I mean, isn't that like exactly what Donald Trump did? He like, let's go to the Capitol, he said in his speech. Let's go to the Capitol. Didn't he set on foot the insurrection, but also insists or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or gives aid or comfort thereto shall be fined under this title or in prison. So yeah, that's the rebellion or insurrection, and that's the one that the Fox News commentators Jonathan Turley and Andrew McCarthy kind of focus on, and I think they chose that instead of the seditious conspiracy charge, because seditious conspiracy actually requires that there is a conspiracy, an agreement between Donald Trump and some of those other people, and that requires like extra evidence, while the insurrection charge only requires that you incite or give comfort or aid to people who are, to people who are rebelling against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, which is what people were doing. So it doesn't require a conspiracy, it just requires inciting. And Jonathan Turley, I don't know, I seem to remember, like, way in the distant past, he wasn't like a total partisan hack, but since he's been working for Fox News, at least since Trump and the impeachments, his analysis is totally tendentious towards, like, what exonerates Donald Trump, and that's the argument I'm going to make, because they focus on... Now, I actually agree that if you were just to look at Trump's speech, his, like, Stop the Steal speech, there are some parts in there where he says, like, be peaceful, and I don't think that speech itself meets what Jonathan Turley will refer to as the Brandenburg Standard, which is in order for your speech to be against the law and not just like free speech, it has to be intended to result in imminent lawless action and also likely to produce that result. In the Brandenburg case, I've talked about this before, it's like a KKK speech where they're saying, like, kill the Jews, but in order for it to violate the Brandenburg standard, it can't be just like generally kill the Jews. You have to have, like, Jews right there when he's asking you to kill the Jews, or whatever. But as someone who is ethnically Jewish, I think I can adequately say or have like the moral authority to say that I kind of agree with the Brandenburg Standard, and you should, in order to be criminalized for your speech, you have to intend to incite imminent lawless action and have that be the likely result. And Trump's speech as a whole, I don't think you could say meets that standard, but he did other things. He did other things like later. What about that tweet where when he knew that they were already rioting and Mike Pence was there and he wanted to like egg them on and get them to stop the certification of the vote? Remember that tweet on January 6th here? That's what I was going to show, that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country. This is the one that like really riled up the crowd and like increased the violence. And it doesn't even have to be violence. It just has to be lawless action, which is like stopping the certification of the vote. So keep that in mind when you see this ridiculous partisan hack legal analysis from Jonathan Turley and Andrew McCarthy that I will talk about a little more. This came right after the final January 6th committee meeting. And I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Can you please weigh in on what this means? Obviously, from this day forward, the threat of the former president, being legally blocked from holding office, this could hang over his candidacy unless the DOJ makes it very clear where they stand on this referral.
Well, that's always the risk of a referral. First of all, it obviously has no binding effect, but the risk is the Department of Justice could ultimately just reject this and really contradict the claims of many that the criminal conduct here is obvious. It's not obvious. That this committee again promised that there would be new evidence being displayed today. There was a couple videos that we had not seen before, but there was no direct new evidence of a criminal act by the former president. That's not to say that his conduct wasn't reckless or reprehensible, but that's not a criminal act. And it was basically a rehashing of what we've seen in virtually every one of these hearings, and they simply attach these referrals to it. So the Department of Justice could reject this referral and take it nowhere. They could also take it to trial and look for a favorable jury in places like D.C. The problem is, I don't think these convictions on this evidence would likely withstand judicial scrutiny. The biggest problem are those counts that turn on the president's speech. That speech, in my view, was protected under existing Supreme Court cases like Brandenburg. It would not meet the standard the Supreme Court has set out for the criminalization of speech. That's my view. But I expect it as, even if they were to eke out a conviction, they'd have a pretty hard time on appeal.
So, Andy, if we could bring you in here first, just your general reaction to what we just heard.
Well, again, I think not only is the Justice Department, Jonathan mentioned that this is not binding, and the Justice Department could reject it. My sense is the Justice Department will ignore it, which is what the Justice Department generally does when Congress grandstands in this fashion. I would just point out the last referral that they made was about incitement and incitement of the violence at the Capitol. The Justice Department has prosecuted upwards of 800 people in connection with the Capitol riot. Insurrection is a federal crime. They have not brought a single insurrection case against anybody who's been prosecuted. They have taken the position in the most serious cases that they brought in connection with seditious conspiracy that Trump was not an unindicted co-conspirator. And to the extent that the defendants who were charged tried to blame Trump in those cases, the Justice Department took the position that he was basically a pretext for things that these militia-type groups were planning to do anyway. So the Justice Department, in order to prosecute Trump at this point for inciting or aiding and abetting the incitement of the Capitol riot, they would have to completely unwind and reverse the position that they've taken for about 2 years on these cases. So, and the other thing about that is the committee knows that. And yet they haven't addressed it. They don't address it. In connection with Trump's speech, he took pains in the speech to say that, he wanted them to march peacefully. The fact that the committee doesn't broadcast that he said that doesn't make that go away. So, again, this is a theatrical exercise more than, a real hearing process.
Well, I pretty much pre-criticized that, but I'll summarize again both that argument at the end that Andrew McCarthy made, that was also Jonathan Turley's argument that, he said in his speech that people should march peacefully, and so the speech itself can't be incitement or meet the incitement standard, but that's bogus because, like I said, it doesn't take into account this tweet about Mike Pence that Trump, and there's testimony of people saying he sent this out when he doesn't want to tell people to be nonviolent. He thinks what they're doing is good and that Mike Pence deserves it. There was testimony that came out about that. That's his intent. He intended to cause lawless action. To drive Mike Pence away, and maybe not hang Mike Pence, but at least to drive him away from certifying the election. And his tweet was likely to cause that result. That meets that Brandenburg standard that Turley was talking about and Andrew McCarthy was kind of supporting. And then he also talked about how no one had been charged with insurrection. They were charged with seditious conspiracy. But as I mentioned before, I showed that last clip, seditious conspiracy requires a conspiracy. The insurrection charge doesn't require a conspiracy. It just requires inciting, aiding, or giving comfort to insurrection or rebellion. And there are a lot of different ways that Donald Trump, in the wind-up to January 6th, gave aid and comfort and helped incite. And then, even that Mike Pence tweet that I've been talking about, that's inciting the insurrection at a key point, and they didn't really deal with that. And then of course they didn't deal with the other charges, the whole the pressure on Mike Pence, the pressure on the different state legislatures, the attempt to like take over the Department of Justice, you know, the Jeffrey Clark for Jeffrey Rosen switch, where he was then going to send out letters to all the states saying there was the Department of Justice saw fraud in the election, which would give Trump a pretext to do all sorts of things, and he would have done it if like all of the top Justice Department officials hadn't threatened to resign, that whole thing. And the creation of the slate of fake electors, and there's just like so many different parts of the Trump conspiracy around January 6th and the big lie and denying the results of the election that Fox News legal commentator clip I just showed you totally ignored. And I mean, total legal hackery. I mean, someone should report them to the bar for that, like, poor analysis. Or, well, I wouldn't go that far, maybe, but maybe. I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now I'm going to move on to, like, what is more normal for my Monday media mix-up, where I go through the news summaries from longest to shortest. These cover the so-called crisis at the border, which I will argue later is a crisis of refugees, and I'll even show you a really great Democratic representative from Texas, Veronica Escobar, totally destroying all the Fox News talking points about Biden's border crisis, and that's like a 10.5-minute clip that I'll stop along the way and talk about how Veronica Escobar destroys the Fox News talking points on immigration in clip 12. I'll talk about COVID a little bit, and I'm going to show you a couple Republicans sort of responding to what we just saw, the Trump destruction of the Republican Party, Asa Hutchinson, and who's the other Republican who I'm going to show you? Asa Hutchinson. Oh, and Pat Toomey, the retiring senator from Pennsylvania, both talking about the demise of the Republican Party. But before I get to any of that, I'm going to show you the Sunday morning news analysis show news summaries from longest to shortest. The longest one this week was the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. It's so long, I'm not even going to show you the whole thing, because they had the news summary and they kind of combined it with Martha Raddatz talking to Texas Governor Greg Abbott and about the whole like border crisis. I'm not going to show you all of that, but I am going to show you all the way through ACLU immigration rights attorney Lee Gallant making one point that totally destroys one of the big Fox News Biden border crisis talking points I hear all the time. And I will talk about that a little more after we watch that ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. We are 1 week out from Christmas, with a record number of Americans expected to travel in the coming days to celebrate the holiday with family and friends. While across the country, COVID and flu infections are climbing, challenging hospitals already grappling with RSV. On Capitol Hill, the January 6th committee is preparing its final hearing with Donald Trump in the crosshairs for potential legal action. But we begin this morning with the crisis at the southern border. After a year of record-breaking migrant crossings, another surge is looming. On Wednesday, the Biden administration is set to end the controversial Title 42 immigration policy. The order was first put in place by President Trump during the pandemic, ostensibly to stop the spread of COVID-19 in the U.S. It's set to expire on Wednesday after a long legal fight, unless the Supreme Court steps in. I traveled to the Texas border this week and saw a system under extreme strain, thousands of people crossing each day. The Biden administration projecting even more once Title 42 expires. Overnight, El Paso declaring a state of emergency as migrants flood into the city. We'll cover the debate and potential fallout in a few minutes, but first, the growing crisis at the border and the Texas governor's warning about what could come next. They are arriving in record-breaking numbers. 2 million this year. Masses of migrants, families, children clinging to their mothers, forging rivers with little but the clothes on their backs. Roughly 2,500 migrants have crossed into El Paso every day this week, pushing the state to the brink. And that's before Title 42 is set to expire, when the Department of Homeland Security predicts the numbers along the southern border will swell to 18,000 a day.
Looks like some migrants right there. Some people walking single file. The vehicle they're going to is a Border Patrol vehicle.
We joined Governor Greg Abbott of Texas as he surveyed the border this week, one of the Republican governors fighting to keep Title 42 in place. That Trump policy implemented at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, which allows the U.S. government to immediately expel most migrants as a public health risk. Since March of 2020, it's been used nearly 2.5 million times. What do you think happens next week when Title 42 comes to an end?
If the courts do not intervene and put a halt to the removal of Title 42, it's going to be total chaos.
But how do you keep that in place? That is about COVID. That is about public health risk.
Whether it's COVID or some other issue, when you have people coming across the globe without knowing at all what their health status is, that almost by definition is a public health risk. There's every reason to keep that in place.
You're talking about the flu, you're talking about RSV. In fact, you've seen that people coming across, they were saying maybe one person a day with COVID. So how does a judge look at that and go, oh, it's still a public health risk?
But some do come across with COVID, and no one knows exactly who comes across with COVID. These people are not tested when they come across the border. And so who knows how many people have COVID? Who knows what other type of disease they may have? The answer is nobody knows, because nobody is testing them.
Critics call that hypocrisy.
They have been fighting to end COVID restrictions everywhere since the beginning. And now, all of a sudden, they want a public health restriction solely when it comes to asylum seekers. I think the real game here is that they're trying to close the border.
And Lee Gallant from the ACLU has a point there. I'm a huge fan of Lee Gallant. He's a great attorney. And I actually went to Texas about a year ago, November 2021. I had to go there for a wedding, and I was like horrified by the total lack of COVID restrictions during. This was like right when the Delta surge was happening, and there's possibly another COVID surge happening now that you saw briefly reported at the beginning of that news summary, and I'm gonna talk about more when I get to the Ashish Jha clip, also from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. But I mean, I think that that was. I mean, at least they had the ACLU there to point out that Republicans have been like trying to avoid all COVID restrictions for years, but then when it comes to like closing the border, all of a sudden COVID is a public health emergency, and that's total hypocrisy, and it like harkens back to like so many anti-immigrant tropes. You know, they're like dirty and diseased. They're bringing I can't remember, there was like some Fox News story a couple years ago about that, where they were like claiming they were bringing leprosy or something. I can't even. But I mean, what happened to like bring us? You're tired, you're poor, you're huddled masses yearning to breathe free. I mean, if you have huddled masses, probably in these days, some of them are going to have COVID. And you heard Martha Raddatz pointing out to Texas Governor Greg Abbott, like, one person a day has COVID. That's a public health emergency. Well, why don't you run your state that way, Governor Abbott? And I don't think that was completely covered very well in terms of how the courts are approaching, you know, how Title 42 is actually ending because that's what the courts have ordered. Although breaking news since this just happened in the last few hours, the Supreme Court has like put a temporary stay on the end of Title 42 on Wednesday, although it may not even last till Wednesday. But to give the Biden administration a chance to respond to this emergency request by Republican governors to keep it in place. But this next news story is very similar, but it's the Fox News Sunday news story, and they have their reporter who's like on the border all the time, trying to hype up the threat from immigrants. This is the Fox News Sunday News Summary, Shannon Bream, and then Bill Malugin. And you know how I was talking about how the courts have actually ordered the end of Title 42, although the Supreme Court has put a brief stay on that. They, the way they talk about that is they say courts are clearing the way for Title 42 to end. That's not really an accurate way to say that courts have ordered that it has to end. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the Fox News Sunday News Summary together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. Since early in the pandemic, a Trump-era policy called Title 42 allowed the U.S. government to turn away hundreds of thousands of migrants at the border. The policy was put in place due to concerns over the spread of COVID-19, but courts have cleared the way for Title 42 to end this week. The White House insists that does not mean the border will soon be open, but many say the change will kick off yet another massive surge of people arriving to a border that's already chaotic. In a moment, Texas Democratic Congresswoman Veronica Escobar will join us to discuss the big changes. But first, let's turn to Bill Malugin live in Eagle Pass, Texas, for a look at the difficult conditions along the border. Hello, Bill.
Hi, Shannon. 2 weeks ago, President Biden was asked if he would visit the border during his trip to Arizona, but he responded that there were more important things going on. Well, now the city of El Paso is completely overwhelmed with the migrant crisis. They've just declared a state of emergency, and the worst may be yet to come.
Stunning new video out of El Paso, Texas this week, where a massive migrant caravan of more than 1,000 people crossed illegally into the U.S., making it the largest single group Fox News has ever seen. The El Paso sector has recently averaged over 2,400 illegal crossings per day and has already seen over 139,000 migrant encounters since October 1st. That reflects a staggering 255% increase over the same time last year. Local Customs and Border Protection facilities are well over capacity, and local shelters are overwhelmed. Border Patrol has been releasing hundreds of migrants to El Paso streets every day, with many of them becoming homeless, forced to camp out on city streets at night in the bitter cold. Thousands of others have been camped out behind the border wall, waiting to be let in for processing. The CEO of one shelter says what's happening there is unprecedented.
We've never seen anything like this, and I've been the CEO 25 years. Now, all of a sudden, the Border Patrol is releasing as many as 500, 600 a day just to the streets of El Paso.
Massive groups continue to cross illegally in Eagle Pass as well, with Fox News drone video showing this group of several hundred migrants after they crossed. CBP sources tell Fox News the Del Rio sector has seen nearly 118,000 migrant encounters since October 1st. That's up 55% over last year.
When you look at a typical month, we should be apprehending somewhere between 1,000 to 1,500 people a day. Our resources are stretched when we apprehend 2,000 people a day. We're already at 8,000. We can expect to see by January, we can expect to see between 10 to 12,000, and then it could just go up from there.
And that is because Title 42 is set to drop in just 3 days from now. When that happens, DHS is projecting the border could be seeing anywhere between 9,000 and 15,000 illegal crossings every single day. Shannon?
All right, Bill Malugin reporting from the U.S.-Mexico border. Bill, thank you very much. Joining us now, Democratic Congresswoman of Texas, Veronica Escobar.
And like I said earlier, Veronica, sometimes I have like the cross-examination of the week. Well, this week I have like the guest that fights back against the Fox News talking points of the week. Veronica Escobar does an awesome job. I'm going to show you that in clip 12, and it's like I said, over a 10-minute clip, but I'm going to stop at a few points along the way and point out the Fox News talking points that Veronica Escobar destroys, and then I'm even going to show a couple clips after that about how Fox News ended up using a very small portion of that clip in a really biased way. Peter Ducey, that's clip number 13 on America's Newsroom this morning. He actually got his dishonest clips mixed up and showed the wrong one. But anyway, if you want to stay tuned to the end of the program, those are the last 3 clips that will explain extra Fox News bias. But I don't know. They have been reporting on the one thing that was missing from that Fox News Sunday news summary is they didn't have the whole graphic and Chiron Biden's border crisis. I don't know why they don't do that on Fox News Sunday when Bill Maloogian's reports all the rest of the week are preceded by this scary graphic and then have a Chiron underneath that says Biden's border crisis. And are they that's the one part of Fox News that pretends not to be biased, but the bias is still there. And I'll show that later, like I said in the last few clips. But most of the other news programs also talked about the end of Title 42, although they mixed it in with other topics. The next longest news summaries from Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press, where he really focused in on this theme that Meet the Press has been talking about for, I guess, years now, if you've been paying attention. This America Divided. That's their go-to theme that they harp on as much. I mean, it's actually true. America is really closely divided, and they show how the midterms also, the results of the midterms show how both the Republican and the Democratic Party are, first, that America is divided, but that they both are having some problems and some internal conflicts, especially the Republicans. But then you'll see Chuck Todd also talks about the end of Title 42 and the so-called border crisis, and I'll explain why I'm calling it a so-called border crisis. Maybe I will explain it, but maybe it'll be after this clip, somewhere before I get to that great Veronica Escobar clip. I'll explain it. But here's Chuck Todd with the NBC News Meet the Press news summary from yesterday that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And a good Sunday morning. As we wrap up the year and prepare to enter a new one, entrenched political warfare has shifted our playing field just inches. Both parties are still struggling with the same problems they've had for the last few years. This Congress and the next one are 2 of the most closely divided in the past century. Republicans will have just a 10-seat majority in the House, and the Senate has moved from a 50-50 Senate controlled by Democrats via a VP tiebreaker to a 51-49 split. Not exactly a mandate for the Democrats. After a disappointing midterm cycle, Republican leaders are the ones under fire right now. The head of the Republican National Committee is mired in a bitter fight over who will lead the party. Kevin McCarthy is scrambling to get the votes he needs to be Speaker of the House, saying hardliners on the right have not moved, and it may put the agenda in jeopardy. And then there's Donald Trump running again after losing, and in more legal trouble. A major announcement this week bordered on self-parody. It was an infomercial for digital trading cards of himself selling for $99. It was even too much for former advisor Steve Bannon to defend. Democrats, meanwhile, may have a false sense of security, acting like they won the midterms. But they did lose the House, and they did lose the popular vote. President Biden's approval rating is stuck where it was a year ago, in the low to mid-40s. In many ways, their successes of the midterms came perhaps only because of the excesses of the Trump right. This is the backdrop for the current immigration debate over the end of Title 42, the COVID-era policy that allowed officials to expel migrants from U.S. borders quickly, a crisis that has been mired in government inaction. In fact, some Democrats have criticized all of Washington for not doing more over 2 administrations.
The reality is that government has not been up to the task. Partisan politics have gotten in the way.
Who's listening to the men and women in green and blue? And more importantly, who's listening to our border communities. I've actually written letters to the president asking him not to lift Title 42. I mean, we're still not completely out of a pandemic.
There's no question in my mind that we are not prepared for a post-Title 42 world. And we need to reconcile the fact that the federal government is not committed to comprehensive reform.
Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown is the only Democrat to win statewide in Ohio in the past decade. By the way, he did announce that he is running for a fourth term in 2024. Senator Brown, welcome back.
And I don't have a clip of Senator Sherrod Brown. If you want to see the entire Meet the Press program, I put links down under sources in the video description to the sources of all my videos, and I think even that Mike Pence doesn't have the courage clip where I got that image from, and all the videos, including Meet the Press. If you want to see what Sherrod Brown has to say, I'm actually going to show you Asa Hutchinson, Republican, responding to both the shenanigans of Marjorie Taylor Greene and also I don't want to get ahead of myself. I want to finish up the news summaries, and I'm being inefficient by talking about clips I haven't even got to yet. But I thought that was a good news summary, except for like the overemphasis on the Meet the Press theme of America Divided. But it did also talk about the end of Title 42, which may or may not happen. But here's the CNN State of the Union news summary next, which is kind of similar. It talks about the busy legislative week, the January 6th committee meeting, Title 42 expiring, and also the fact that Congress has to pass a spending bill by Friday or the government shuts down. That's kind of an important fact that didn't make it into any of the other news summaries, so kudos to CNN for that, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is thinking about whose stockings might deserve coal from Santa this season. While many Americans are focusing on last-minute shopping and holiday gatherings, legislators are actually facing one of the busiest weeks in recent memory. Tomorrow, the January 6th committee is expected to publicly vote to refer criminal charges against Donald Trump to the Justice Department. On Wednesday, the Trump-era immigration policy known as Title 42 will expire, which will certainly bring even more asylum seekers to and across the southern border, exacerbating an already horrific humanitarian crisis there that too few in Washington are prepared to tackle. And by Friday, Congress needs to pass a massive funding bill to keep the government from shutting down, with so many important priorities, from helping Afghan allies to protecting consumers from big tech monopolies, hanging in the balance. This busy lame duck holiday season, just over 2 weeks before a power shift in Washington as House Republicans make preparations to take over. Among their new priorities, taking on the threat from the Chinese government with a new House Select Committee, chaired by Wisconsin Congressman Mike Gallagher, a Marine with national security background, who has already introduced bipartisan legislation to counter China's influence, legislation that is gaining steam in Washington. And Congressman Mike Gallagher joins us now. Congressman.
So yeah, that news summary wasn't bad, although they kind of focused on the threat from China and the new chair of a Republican committee, Mike Gallagher, I guess because they had him as an exclusive guest. That's like a bias that you see from all the corporate media. It's not partisan political bias. They just have a bias towards their exclusive guests. They have bias towards simplification, both sidism, sensationalism, corporatism, and anyway, I don't want to go into all that, but just want to point out bias that's not partisan political bias that you sometimes see on the actual journalistic outlets, you know, the non-Fox News outlets. But I want to get to the final news summary, the shortest news summary. It's Margaret Brennan just sort of talking about the end of Title 42 very briefly at the beginning of the program on Face the Nation yesterday over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. As the country wraps up year-end business and prepares for the holidays, there is once again a crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border. Typically, the influx of migrants seeking a better life in the U.S. comes during the warmer weather. But a pandemic-era rule that allows migrants to be expelled on public health grounds is set to end Wednesday. That rule is called Title 42. That's putting added pressure on border cities like El Paso, Texas, and Yuma, Arizona, where states of emergency have been issued, as well as in cities like Denver and New York, where border state governors have been sending those migrants. And we begin with West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin.
And I don't have any clips of Joe Manchin, but actually, you know, I talked about how down in the video description you can see the source of all my videos under where the heading source is, but it's most accessible probably for of all the big 5 corporate outlets from CBS News' Face the Nation, because they upload all basically the entire Face the Nation program is uploaded in clips to their YouTube channel, and that's the link I put under sources. So if you want to see the Joe Manchin interview that I didn't take a clip from, I actually have a clip coming up later of Keisha Lance Bottoms. That's the final clip I'm going to show from CBS News Face the Nation, but it's kind of a way to debunk a dishonest clip they didn't even show in the Fox News clip before that. That probably doesn't make sense now, but it will by the time we get to that clip. But anyway, if you want to watch the parts of Face the Nation I'm not showing you, that's down at that link in the video description. And that was the final news summary, which I mean, I think they were all pretty journalistic, except maybe for Fox News. But the 2 first newsmaker clips I want to show you are on my main topic, I guess, the January 6th insurrection, or the demise of the Republican Party that has been sort of shown by what we learned from January 6th, how many Republican members of Congress were kind of complicit, and that was some of the new stuff that came out this week, was some of the new text messages, all the complicit Republicans, and they even referred some Republican members of Congress for ethics violations, and I don't want to go off into the weeds on that, but I think these two, first the Jake Tapper interview with retiring Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey was kind of an interesting look at the demise of the Republican Party, because he was like a Tea Party Republican, real conservative, but then he ended up voting he voted for Trump twice in 2016 and 2020. But then after January 6th, when the impeachment of Donald Trump got to the Senate, he's one of the Republicans who voted to convict Donald Trump. And he actually has some kind of harsh words for some Republicans who are in the cult of Donald Trump, following one man. And Jake Tapper asked him about that, and that's the first newsmaker clip I want to show you from Sunday that kind of relates to the main topic of Donald Trump being the first president ever to get a criminal referral from Congress for his criminal behavior. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch Pat Toomey talk to Jake Tapper about that in this clip.
Yeah, I mean, you were elected on a less taxes, less regulation platform. That was kind of your thing as on
less government, yeah.
Yeah, less government as a Tea Party wave. So that wasn't a surprise. And obviously that was where your passion was.
Right.
In your closing address on the Senate floor, you had this message for your party.
For my Republican colleagues, let me just say, our party can't be about or beholden to any one man. We're much bigger than that. Our party is much bigger than that.
It's not hard to figure out what one man you're talking about there. Do you think Republicans are increasingly receptive to that message? Do you think Donald Trump's hold on your party is finally slipping?
Absolutely, I do. First, I think his influence was waning, not as quickly as I had hoped it would, but I think it was waning. But the election outcome from last month, I think, dramatically accelerates the waning. And frankly, his unbelievably terrible rollout of his his election campaign, is also not helping him. So yeah, I mean, I think you see it manifested in a number of ways. One obvious way was quite an impressive turnout of prominent Republicans who have been going to events like the RJC meeting in Las Vegas, openly talking about themselves as candidates after Donald Trump had already made it clear he was running. So it tells you that they perceive the Republican electorate to be much more open. And in my travels since the election around Pennsylvania, I've heard from many, many formerly very pro-Trump voters that they think it's time for our party to move on. So yes, I think that process is underway. It's not a flip of a switch. It doesn't happen overnight. He still has a significant following, that's for sure. But I do think his influence is waning.
Let's talk about the Republican Party writ large. Take a look at this New York Times headline from when you were first elected in 2010. Toomey at helm of a Republican wave in Pennsylvania. When you first came here to Washington, you were seen as one of the most conservative voices in the U.S. Senate. Flash forward 12 years, and now some in the GOP, and it's preposterous, don't get me wrong, but some in the GOP now call you a rhino because you spoke out against Trump's election lies and you were willing to criticize Donald Trump. You are far more conservative than Donald Trump by any stretch, but still people are calling you a rhino. What happened to the Republican Party?
Oh, you know, I first of all, I think this kind of this warping of the language will also subside. You know, there's a tendency, and this happens on both sides of the aisle, there's a tendency to rally around the guy who's being attacked by the other side. Nobody was ever attacked more than Donald Trump was, sometimes legitimately, sometimes not. And he fought back aggressively, and so when Republicans had criticisms of him, I certainly think mine were valid, that doesn't always sit well with folks who see him as carrying the fight to the other side. So as I said, some of that tribalism is, you know, is built into political systems anywhere. Again, I think as his influence wanes, the sort of conventional understanding of what words mean kind of gets restored over time. I'm not too worried about that.
I don't know. I'm kind of worried about that, and I hope the influence of Trump is waning, but I'm not really convinced of that. And I guess it's one of those things the pundits say only time will tell, but that was Pat Toomey trying to explain the demise of the Republican Party, or he seems to think that it's going to right itself in coming years. I don't really have that optimism. And here's Asa Hutchinson, governor of Arkansas, possible nominee or possible candidate to be the nominee from the Republicans for president in 2024, might be running against Donald Trump, the only person who has said they're running for the nomination so far. And so Chuck Todd actually asks him to respond to a couple things. First, the Marjorie Taylor Greene clip I showed as my political comedy at the beginning of the show, where she says, oh, you know, if I had been organizing January 6th, we would have been successful. If Steve Bannon and I had done it, we would have been successful, and we would have been armed. Of course, a lot of people on January 6th were armed, but then you'll see that Chuck Todd also asks him about this new vaccine skepticism from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, where he actually was a proponent of vaccines when they came out, and he even told people to get vaccinated, but now to try to get to the right of Donald Trump, who was, you know, Project Warp Speed is one of his accomplishments, and he told people to get vaccinated, and now Ron DeSantis is trying to get to the right and be anti-vaccine, and you'll see Asa Hutchinson respond to that, which is kind of a disturbing development in the Republican Party that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Look, you're thinking about running for president in 2024, and if you become the nominee, you're the leader of the party. And I'm curious, if you were leader of the party right now, how would you deal with somebody who says the following. And I want to play this piece of sound from Marjorie Taylor Greene from just a week ago.
If Steve Bannon and I had organized that, we would have won. Not to mention, it would have been armed.
That was Marjorie Taylor Greene making light of January 6th, basically saying, hey, if Steve Bannon and her were in charge, it would have been, I guess, a more armed insurrection. She's becoming quite influential in your party. What do you do?
You know, the first thing is that you win on the ideas and the Constitution, and so you don't back away from going to the same audience that she does and say, January 6th was a serious affront to our democracy, and we have to treat that seriously, and we can't defend what happened on that day, and we stand up for the Constitution. And so I've always gone to those tough audiences, explain that, and guess what? They listen, and there's always some that disagree, but you've got to win in the marketplace of ideas, and as a leader of the party, that's what you've got to do.
Well, it's funny you bring it up that way, because you spent a lot of 2021 trying to get some skeptics to take the vaccine in Arkansas. So I'm curious what you think of what Governor DeSantis is now doing down there. He has changed his view on vaccine over the last year. Let me show the audience that.
My message is the vaccines protect you. Get vaccinated.
Like anything, I mean, you take an mRNA shot, and the way to view it is, okay, what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks? And it seems like our medical establishment never wanted to be honest with people about the potential drawbacks.
Florida governor is leaning into vaccine skepticism at a time when I know health officials are trying to get people to take these boosters so that we can prevent the 300 deaths a day that we're still averaging in America. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, we shouldn't undermine science. We shouldn't undermine the medical community that's very important to our public health. And whenever you look at how I handled the pandemic in Arkansas, we didn't have mandates of government forcing people to take the vaccine, but I did go out into the communities, and I had the medical experts there educating them as to how this is beneficial and how this is important, and I had local community doctors addressing that. So I think we are not good as a society. It's not the right direction if we diminish the facts, we diminish all the best information that we have from science at the time. And sure, during the pandemic, things changed from time to time. We had more information, so we had to adjust, and that's what leaders do. But I don't think it's good to go back, whether you're going back to the 2020 election or whether you're going back and trying to relitigate everything that happened during the pandemic. That's not helpful for where we are, and we do need to make sure we get the protection, whether it's a flu shot or whether it's a COVID vaccine. Everybody makes their decision, but I'm for the education and the science behind it.
It wouldn't be Meet the Press if I didn't try to pinpoint.
And then he asks him if he's going to run for president, and I bet he's going to, but he seems to be more pro-science than Ron DeSantis, and I don't know where he then positions him. You know, Ron DeSantis trying to get to the right of Donald Trump for being somewhat pro-vaccine, and I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous that it's politicized, and I mean, kudos to Meet the Press for showing the flip-flop of Ron DeSantis, where he was like pro-vaccine, but now he's like vaccine skeptical. And I have to say, I mean, I got my flu shot, I got my bivalent booster. I actually mask when I'm in crowded public spaces. I am not a big fan of the denial of the continuing COVID pandemic. That, I mean, I go out a lot of places where I'm like the only person wearing a mask, and I don't know why that is, because the cases, you know, as Chuck Todd pointed out, like 300 people dying a day, and there are a lot of people who don't have the most recent booster, and cases are going up, and I think that actually things could get really bad in the United States. But one thing that people aren't reporting on as much is what's going on in China. Like, they just like gave up on their zero COVID policy, and they have a huge population that is not well vaccinated, that doesn't have a history of being infected. And I've seen things like the COVID cases are doubling in like less than a day, like huge increase in cases in China. I mean, if there's this huge spread of COVID in China after the breakdown of their zero COVID policy, millions of people could die in China in the next few months. That is like a totally unreported story on the corporate media this week. I hope that's not going to be a big story coming up, but I get the feeling that there are going to be hundreds of thousands or millions of Chinese people dying of COVID in the next few months, but I guess we'll see. Hospitalizations and deaths are actually up 40% in the last week in the U.S., and only 15% of people have gotten that bivalent COVID booster like I have, but that's kind of the subject of the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Well, first there's an introduction from Martha Raddatz, and then she talks to Ashish Jha, the White House COVID-19 response coordinator, about and if you like parse what he's saying, it sounds like things aren't going to necessarily be that great in terms of COVID in the U.S. in the next several months either, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Hospitals, both for kids and for adults, are very stressed right now. And it's a combination of really of all these viruses.
Lots of very sick patients, lots of patients on the ventilators and the ICU. Our overall hospital capacity is well over 100%.
The triple-demic of COVID, flu, and RSV is hitting Americans and filling hospitals as millions are expected to travel this holiday season. Infections are on the rise in many parts of the country. White House COVID response coordinator Dr. Ashish Jha joins me now to discuss the latest. Good to see you as always, Dr. Jha.
Good morning, Martha.
More than 40% increase since Thanksgiving in COVID cases and hospitalizations. That is a very big spike.
It's a clear increase. It's a substantial increase. We're seeing it across 90% of the country. So yeah, COVID cases are rising across the country right now.
And there was a statistic that really stood out to me from your White House briefing. Less than half of nursing home residents have gotten their updated COVID vaccine, even though deaths are occurring mostly concentrated in people over 65. You say you're talking to leadership, trying to get them vaccinated. Why hasn't this been happening?
Yeah, so, people are still, I think, learning about the new COVID vaccine, the updated booster. There's still a lot of people who are confused about whether they need one or not. We're being very clear about this. If you've not gotten a vaccine in the last 6 months, it is essential to go out and get the new updated bivalent. This is ongoing work, but I actually think we're seeing real increases in the last couple of weeks, and my hope is that that momentum continues.
And why this 40% increase? Is it no masks? Is it no vaccines? What do you say about that?
Well, so we're not totally surprised by this, right? Because we've seen increases each of the last 2 winters. And then what else is happening? In colder, drier air, the virus spreads more efficiently. People are gathering, as they should, because it's really important to gather with family and friends. And so that combination is what is driving the increase. The good news here is that we can prevent those infections from turning into serious illness if people go out and get that updated bivalent vaccine. The updated vaccine is essential for keeping people out of the hospital. So we're making the case that we're at a point where it's safe to gather, but you still have things to do. If we don't do those things, obviously things can get much worse.
Okay, Dr. Jha, we've talked to you many times. You say the White House strategy is to get boosted, get tested, wear masks. You and I have both talked about the lack of masks across the country. You're just not seeing them. That's the strategy, but only 14% of people who can get that booster have done it. So How can you say that is really working?
Well, what I would say is it is a comprehensive strategy: testing, treatment, vaccines. Our job is to make sure those things are widely available, easily accessible. They remain free for Americans. We're going to continue making that case, and then obviously a lot of our efforts are focused on older Americans. Those are the ones who really tend to get sick, end up in the hospital. This is ongoing work. It's shared collective responsibilities. It's not just the White House. We're asking governors to step up, mayors to step up, religious leaders to step up, because if we're going to get a country as big and diverse as ours through this difficult period, we're all going to have to pull on this together.
Well, according to a new poll from the Kaiser Family Foundation, the top 2 reasons people are not getting vaccinated are, number 1, they don't think they need it, or they don't think the benefit is worth it.
Yeah, so first of all, from a benefit point of view, I mean, these are incredibly safe vaccines. They clearly work. They clearly reduce infections to some degree, hospitalizations and deaths to a very, very large degree. The thing I remind people often say, well, I got my booster last year, do I really need it? And I say, well, I got my flu shot last year. I don't expect that to protect me this winter. I go out and get my flu shot every winter, and the same way people have to go out and get their COVID shot every winter.
And I want to talk about some anecdotal evidence about the lack of medicines.
So yeah, that was really important information and also kind of a scary analysis of what's going on in the United States regarding the COVID pandemic, that a lot of people won't even recognize that cases and hospitalizations have gone up 40% in the last week. Only like 15% of Americans over the age of 5 have gotten the bivalent booster, which I got that. Get your flu shot, get your bivalent booster. That's like the number 1 thing you can do. Number 2 thing you can do is like wear an N95 mask in public spaces. I was saying before the clips, I've been in some public spaces where I'm like the only one wearing that mask. Last Monday's show I did early because I was going to this Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock concert here in Sacramento, in this big big Sacramento amphitheater or indoor. It's like it's a sports center. All I can say is of the thousands, tens of thousands of people in there, I was like one of the few people wearing an N95 mask, and that was kind of disturbing, especially with the high prevalence of COVID in my community. But I think people should be paying more attention to the increase in the COVID epidemic in the United States, plus this thing I've been seeing in China where it looks like it's possible millions of Chinese people might die in the next few months because their zero COVID policy is broken down and they have a population that is kind of COVID naive, not well immunized, and I hope that's not going to be a big story in the next few months, but I think it might be. But anyway, I'm going to go on to the next final topic. This is the Biden border crisis topic that I promised, where I'm going to show you a Fox News clip and Fox News Sunday clip. Shannon Bream actually getting owned or pwned or whatever verb you want to use for a Democrat who goes on Fox News and totally destroys the Fox News talking points. I am totally in awe of the way Veronica Escobar did that, and that's why I took this entire 10.5-minute clip that I'm going to show you and then stop along the way as I want to comment on the way that she has debunked Fox News talking points on the Biden border crisis that I find annoying. I see over and over again, day after day. And anyway, I'll start the clip. Shannon Bream and Democrat Veronica Escobar from Texas talking about Biden's border crisis and who's to blame. And I'll stop it when I get to something I want to talk about with you. So let's start watching that clip together over here.
we'll talk about El Paso, your hometown, in just a minute. But first, I want to start with the White House. They said this week the president is on top of this problem. Local officials there in El Paso do not agree. Here's a little bit from both sides.
What Americans should know is that the president has done the work to deal with what we're seeing at the border since day one.
That is insulting. There's no work being done here. We have been given money. We have been promised money. We have been using money from our general fund. There is nothing being done here in El Paso. It's only going to get worse.
Congresswoman, where do you stand on assessing how the president is handling the situation?
Well, I will tell you that soon-to-be former city representative completely misrepresented the federal government's involvement. FEMA has been...
So the first thing I have to say is I've seen that Claudia Rodriguez clip on Fox News over and over again for like the last week or ever since she said it. And kudos to Veronica Escobar for pointing out that Claudia Rodriguez is like a member of the El Paso City Council who did not win re-election and is like a pariah, or I mean, not representative of El Paso politics. And anyway, now let's continue watching that clip together over here.
Extraordinary in our community. They have advanced funding to local governments. They have been a phone call, a text away all these months. They just approved an additional large upfront funding to the city of El Paso. Those of us who are engaged on this issue here on the ground have very close communication. We have a text thread. The Border Patrol Sector Chief keeps us informed daily on the numbers. But I will tell you, Shannon, I do think it's important that we have far more robust support from the State Department. And here's why. Unfortunately, Congress has failed to act on changing our very outdated immigration laws for decades. The federal government, under Congress's direction, has addressed immigration as a border-only issue. We really have to kind of zoom out and recognize this is a Western Hemispheric refugee crisis of historic proportions impacting...
And that is really important. That is the most important point, the whole debunking of the Biden's border crisis talking point you hear on Fox News over and over again. And I think I talked about this like months and months ago. Like I talked about this like in terms of like The Walking Dead and the zombie apocalypse. If you keep getting people knocking on your door like let us in, we're being chased by zombies, and that happens over and over again, is that like a door knocking crisis, or is the real problem that there are zombies chasing those people? It's like a zombie apocalypse crisis. It's not a door knocking crisis. And if you make it a border crisis, you're totally ignoring the fact that there are all these refugees from Central and South America who are fleeing oppression and violence and all these different conflicts that are creating this refugee crisis. And if you only focus on the people who are like knocking on the door, you're missing what the real crisis is. And so kudos to Veronica Escobar for pointing that out. And now I will continue watching the clip with you over here.
All of our countries to the south of us, we really need far more direct engagement from the State Department, and I've called on the State Department to do that.
Well, let's talk about the broader implications, because in talking with Border Patrol agents, which I'm sure that you do on a regular basis, I had one of them, an official, tell me this week that right now in El Paso, about 60 to 70% of personnel is committed to just processing people. They're not patrolling the border. Their opinion is that once Title 42 lifts on Wednesday, about 90% of what they're doing is going to be just processing people. That leaves them unable to patrol the border for cartels, for drug and human trafficking. They say this is a national security issue. I mean, you look at the fiscal year just behind us, 98 people who were on the terror watch list came across the border. That's that we know of, or that were detected there. This is, as you say, a much broader problem, but how worried are you about the national security implications with the current situation and what most people expect will get much worse on Wednesday?
We absolutely have to get our Border Patrol agents back to performing the functions they were trained to do. And that's why we've really got to rework and reform the way things are happening at the border. I have a bill, a piece of legislation that reforms that creates a civilian workforce for processing. We, about 4 years ago, I introduced the idea. We funded it. We now have central processing coordinators, civilian public servants for the federal government doing the processing. We've got to expand that so that agents can get back to performing those functions that they need to perform for our national security purposes. Now, I will share with you, like when you look at those videos, you see mostly folks who are, the vast majority of whom are waiting in line to request asylum. That is what's overwhelming the system, and we've got to make sure that we continue to press on Congress to reform what are outdated processes, outdated laws, to adequately fund the State Department, because while, yes, I want the White House to do more, I also want Congress to act. And I don't want us to do more of the same, Shannon, which is focus only on deterrence, focus on immigration as a border issue. We've done that for decades, and this is what it's gotten us today.
Let's put up some hard data so we can look at the trend of what's been happening. This is from the CBP, and essentially what they're showing us in October, their migrant encounters were 230,678 at the border. That's up 40% from the October of the previous year, 221% from the October before that, and before that, 411% increase. There's clearly a trend here. We have numbers that show overall incursions for the year as well. Now, critics say that although this administration continues to say the border's secure, it's under control, the border is safe, it is not open, there are critics who say these numbers prove otherwise. They include Democrats like California Governor Gavin Newsom, like Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, who say there is a massive problem. Do you count yourself among those Democrats?
We absolutely have a problem, but the challenge here is, again, Congress has failed to act. We started seeing the increase in numbers and a change in what was happening at the border going all the way back to 2014, when we started seeing large numbers of unaccompanied minors. During the prior administration, that was the Obama administration. During the Trump administration, we saw significant numbers that decreased as a result mostly of COVID, because nobody knows what was happening here on the border more than those of us who live and work here. But the pandemic
during the first couple years of the Trump administration, there were massive drops in numbers when people got the message that they weren't going to come here and have an easy process into the country illegally. Those numbers changed again once people realized Congress wasn't going to go along with his plans. The wall was not going to get built. I mean, there was a drop under his tough talk, and then we saw the increases again, and now they're exponential in this administration.
Those numbers were high under the Trump administration, and they dropped as a result of the pandemic, when the traffic or the flow of humanity stopped. I mean, I visited not just the central processing facilities, but I visited the Border Patrol stations where it was, we had facilities that were so overcrowded, children were dying. That happened under the Trump administration. So my point is, though, not to necessarily go administration by administration, although I'm happy to review those numbers, but to say this has been ongoing for a long time, and Congress's response has been, let's keep doing the same thing. Let's treat immigration as a border-only policy. Everyone should now see and understand that is a failure. It's an expensive failure. It's not good for the agents. It's not good for the migrants. I can tell you it's not good for border communities like ours. We have to be smarter about this and begin looking at the bigger picture, or things will get worse, regardless of who's in the White House, but depending on who's in Congress.
Well, to the point about the children, Politico magazine had a report over the summer that talked about the facilities. They say it's no place for a child where these children are being held in Border Patrol facilities. It says the records show that conditions for minors have not significantly improved under President Joe Biden. And critics will argue that there are a number of attractive policies and things here that are drawing more and more people. I mean, Governor Gavin Newsom, in talking about the trouble at the border this week, admitted, listen, he was somebody who said free health care for everybody in the California budget, regardless of your status. And now he's demanding that the federal government bail them out.
You know, I don't know about you or about any of my Republican colleagues who love to parachute into my community and do their photo ops at the border, but I have spoken to migrants, and I've been speaking to migrants who arrive at our nation's front door here in El Paso for decades. I've been talking to them as recently as a couple of weeks ago. The vast majority of migrants don't know who Gavin Newsom is or what his policies are. The vast majority of migrants
I just wanted to stop there briefly to, I'm going to show you a clip from the American Newsroom report on this whole issue from this morning that totally misrepresents what Veronica Escobar was saying there and uplifts what the Republican who appeared after her, Chip Roy, was saying, which makes no sense. But this whole thing about how immigrants are responding to what federal officials are saying, not what the coyotes, who the human traffickers, they like. If the federal officials are just going to be saying the border's closed, then all of a sudden the coyotes aren't going to say that you should give us money to get you to the United States. That doesn't even make sense. And Veronica Escobar kind of makes that point in the rest of this clip. I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
You know, actually, when they arrive, they will tell you about their arduous journey, why they left, what is pushing them out of their home country, what is making them take that dangerous journey just to seek refuge and help and asylum.
Congresswoman, is it also fair to say, though, that is it fair to say that the cartels, the bad actors, the smugglers, the coyotes, will say to them, these are the policies and things that now wait for you if you come with us. If you take this terrible journey where, I mean, the largest number of migrant deaths ever recorded at the border last year, almost 900 people. We know these are real human beings and children and families, but they're being exploited because of what they're being told about the policies that await them here.
100%. These cartels, these human traffickers are evil, and it is horrific what they are doing. And in fact, there are some policies, most of which started under President Trump, that are still in place under President Biden, like Title 42, which is still in place today, that the cartels exploit. But I will tell you, when I spoke to migrants under the Trump administration, they were telling migrants, you better come now. You know, Trump is going to build the wall. That's when we saw large numbers coming through El Paso. And frankly, having Republican colleagues go on national TV consistently saying the border is open, the border is open. They're the ones saying the border is open. I think their rhetoric has a role to play as well in what the cartels use. But regardless, I will tell you, the cartels will do anything possible to exploit these folks, whether they tell the truth, whether they lie, it doesn't matter. But what's motivating folks is persecution, poverty, famine, and we've got to address this as more than just a border issue, or it will not change.
And we can't forget that these are real human lives. I know you see that every day and are committed as a third-generation El Pasoan there to helping your community. Congresswoman, we thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you, Shannon.
So I don't know, does Shannon Bream get a little bit of acceptance for talking to that Democrat from Texas there, the Veronica Escobar, who I think did a great job of refuting all the Fox News talking points on the Biden border crisis. But at the end, Shannon Bream was like, "Oh, thank you for talking to us. You're a third-generation El Paso resident, so we respect you." But the whole rest of the interview was like a total disrespect for people who are looking at the Biden border crisis as actually a Western Hemisphere refugee crisis. And Veronica Escobar, I think, did a great job of refuting multiple Fox News talking points there about the Biden border crisis and how it's really a refugee crisis. But the thing I wanted to point out before I finish the program here is the way that Fox News then earlier today went on to, well, this is a Peter Doocy supposedly journalistic news report on what you just saw, where he's saying that a Biden administration representative was saying that Biden didn't go to the border because he didn't want to take away resources from the border, and they're attributing that to Keisha Lance Bottoms in a clip I'm going to show you at the end, when that's not even what she really said. But Peter Doocy and his producer didn't even get the right clip. They showed a clip instead of Veronica Escobar there making a really incisive point about how Republicans parachute into the border to claim they're interested in the issue when they aren't really from the border. But then they edit it with Republican Chip Roy claiming he is from the border, but he's actually 100 miles from the border. He says, my border is 100 miles from the border, but I think he means his district is 100 miles from the border, which is really kind of a long way away. But I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Right, so far, President Biden remains in Delaware for another hour or two, where he was all weekend long. And despite what we've been hearing from officials here at the Biden White House about an all-of-government approach to prepare for the end of Title 42, it is Democrats now who are very unsatisfied with the Biden White House's approach, and they're starting to blame the people around the president.
President Biden can do this, but without due respect, I think his advisors are doing a disservice to him.
A top White House advisor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, now says President Biden hasn't gone to the border himself yet because it would tie up too many resources.
You know, I don't know about you or about any of my Republican colleagues who love to parachute into my community and do their photo ops at the border.
It's hard to say we parachute in. We live there. We live in Texas. The border I represent on its southwest edge is about 100 miles from the border.
Right.
So you have Fox News today. You saw Peter Doocy there showed the wrong clip. And it was a clip that was kind of dishonest because you saw Veronica Escobar talking about how Republicans are parachuting into the border to give commentary when they're not really dealing with what's happening at the border. And then Chip Roy says, well, my district is, the border of my district is 100 miles from the border, but no cross-examination on the fact that he's like 100 miles is probably far away. But the final clip I want to show you is what Keisha Lance Bottoms said, which isn't even what Peter Doocy claimed she said. Not that Biden didn't visit the border because of the resources taken away. She actually said, "Oh, I don't even know why he didn't visit the border, but I have some things to say about Biden border policy that didn't make it into any of the clips," and I'll talk about that after we watch that final newsmaker clip together for the program today over here.
Well, why doesn't he go to the border? He was just in Arizona. Why wasn't it worth his time?
Well, you have to remember, Margaret, when the president travels, it's not like you or I jumping on an airplane and getting off and going to our destination. Everything comes to a halt. So all of these things are in consideration for the president. Is that the best use of resources? All of the resources that will be diverted on the ground when the president makes a visit.
Is that why he didn't go?
Is that visit... well, I can't speak to why he has or has not gone. I'm just speaking to the fact that it's a bit more disruptive for the president of the United States to travel than you or I. But what the president has done is continue to lean in on this immigration issue. It's something that he ran on. And what we know over the past 2 years, every single thing that the president has run on, he's put time and resources into addressing it. So immigration, we know, is a problem that he did not create. Our issues with immigrations are decades-long issues, and he will continue to lean in through the White House and through Congress to get comprehensive immigration reform done.
All right, we'll be watching.
So yeah, not only did Peter Doocy on Fox News on America's Newsroom this morning showed the wrong clip that was supposed to be Keisha Lance Bottoms saying something she didn't say. So they showed the wrong clip, and then the clip that they should have shown actually doesn't say what they said it was going to say. So that is like multiple levels of Fox News bias I wanted to finish my live stream with. So thank you all for joining me. I will be back every Monday for, I guess it's the next 2 years, do my Monday media mix-up. Next week I'll do my final Monday media mix-up of 2022, maybe talk about why I will be continuing to do this live stream through 2024, and until then, or until I have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.